my tribal name, I really liked how you pronounced all my tribal names correctly. Not that you have to, but you did, and that's very rare. And I think that's because we have a common indigenous, you know, affinity for language. And as you as an indigenous Irish woman, and me as a indigenous desert woman from the US. And yes, my mother is Pat McCabe. I saw someone put that in the chat. Who you guys probably some of you know because she gets around those islands quite a bit. So I'm actually going to go over today indigenous food systems, which was the topic of my dissertation. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our common indigeneity and how important it is for all of us to be connected to our respective roots and how important it is as people of the British Isles or wherever you're from to remember why everything I'm telling you about Native American food systems is actually just a mirror of your own lineages back in the times before colonization of those lineages. And then we're going to have 15 minutes discussion of like, how would we apply these ideas to our practice today? So we're going to, talk about that together. So maybe be thinking about that as I present. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into some slides, and I need to be able to present slides. So I think it's asking you to let me do that. Okay. Oh, okay, can y'all see this? Okay. Architects of Abundance, Indigenous Regenerative Food Systems. This picture, and I'm going to go through this a little fast because I only have about half an hour for this section. So I apologize in advance. I'll try to make it as clear and joyful as possible. So this is a picture of oyster shell middens in the Florida riverbanks, which we find, this is based off real archaeological sites. And so I like to show this picture because it shows the proportions of the abundance of the people. And these oyster shell middens are thousands of years old. You find them throughout Florida, just to depict like the beauty and the abundance of pre-colonial indigenous food systems. I'm going to go through a few ancient and contemporary case studies and their strategies and their underlying philosophies. So we're going to go travel around the world a little bit. The first place I want to go to is the chestnut groves of the American eastern woodlands. So these chestnuts used to grow from Maine all the way down to Alabama, Mississippi, covering a wide swath of the eastern woodlands. And people used to think that these chestnut groves, and when I say people, I mean colonists, used to think that these groves were naturally occurring. But now we know that these groves are actually man-made, hand-planted, and propagated in a sustainable way by indigenous nations for thousands of years. And that this was actually not a forest, but rather a grove. And the difference between a forest and a grove is intentional. It's planted, it's cultivated, and it's managed. So the picture on the left is a Cherokee family with one of their old growth chestnut trees. It's obviously huge. On the right, we have an artist's depiction of a tree that's not only allowed to grow vertically, but also horizontally. And that's one of the management styles of indigenous peoples, is that we would space the trees widely so that they have enough sunlight, nutrients, and water per tree. Whereas if you propagate them in rows, as the colonists did when they found the chestnuts, they were so excited, right? They're like, oh, chestnuts, let's create a monoculture. Great idea. That actually weakened the immune systems of the trees, and that actually resulted in a pathogenic blight that wiped out almost all of these chestnuts. This is a historic range of the American chestnut because about 98% of the chestnuts were wiped out by a pathogenic fungal blight that destroyed whole valleys full of chestnuts at a time. This was in the early 1900s. The chestnuts almost completely disappeared. So all of the old growth photos we have of chestnuts are black and white, sadly. But these things were huge. They were heirlooms passed from generation to generation. So we're going to look at some evidence of why we know that this was man-made forest. We're going to look at Cliff Palace Pond, which is in the hills of Kentucky, which is the original homelands of the Shawnee Nation. And we're going to actually look at a soil core that was extracted from Cliff Palace Pond. And soil cores within ponds, if it's a contained pond, they actually withhold or contain layers and layers and layers of fossilized pollen. So you can actually reconstruct the vegetational history of an area over time by looking at the fossilized pollen record of a given pond. And so this graph, the lower you go down the graph, the older the sediment. The higher you go, the younger and more recent the sediment was deposited. So you'll see on the left-hand side of the graph, it goes to 9,500 years old. So there are 9,500 years worth of information in this fossilized pollen core, or this core which contains fossilized pollen. So this was the results. And each column is the presence or absence of a different kind of pollen in this pond in Kentucky. And you can see here this chestnut column. About 3,000 years ago, there comes chestnut out of nowhere, really strongly. And this is why we think this was a man-made forest, because it's also coupled with other edible species for humans, such as hickory nut coming in really strong. And this is black walnut coming in about 2,000 years ago, when it appears that people started to cultivate these walnuts in a biodiverse food forest of chestnut, hickory nut, and walnut. And if you go a little further down the graph, we see sumpweed, which is an edible plant species, sunflower, and goosefoot coming into the record really strongly. We also see on the very right-hand side, fossilized charcoal coming in more consistently. And that's because in order to manage these types of forests, you burn in between the trees. And the reason you burn in between the trees is because your trees are so spaced out widely. We're talking like 13 trees per acre was the management style of pre-colonial food forests. So very spread out. So you can burn in between the trees safely because there's not a lot of trees close together to catch on fire. And you'd burn during the right time of year. And of course, you could burn 100 acres at a time because the whole freaking Appalachian Mountains were a grove. And what that does when you burn in between the trees is you eliminate any competing vegetation that would compete with your selected trees. And not only do you eliminate competing vegetation, but you actually cycle those nutrients from the dead plant tissues in the fall, turn it into nutrient-dense ash, which nourishes the soil system, which then produces nutrient-dense grasslands in the wake of those fires, which then attract herbivores such as elk, bison, deer, even ecca species. And so when you burn, you're actually creating pasturage for herbivores. You're actually feeding herbivores when you burn, because within a matter of weeks, as you'll see in a video I'm going to show you, burning produces really healthy soils and really healthy grasses. Okay, so that's the chestnut groves of the eastern woodlands of the US. Now we're going to go to the Pacific Northwest, the other side of the continent, and then we're going to look at some clam gardens of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation and their neighboring nations as well. The Snohomish do this, a lot of different nations do this. So this rock wall that these people are standing on is 3,500 years old. This is a rock wall made by human beings 3,500 years ago. And this rock wall creates a retaining wall around there's another one here on the right, this black line. This is a man-made rock wall as well. This creates a pool on the shoreline side that supports clam habitat because it's a warmer, calmer pool that even when the tide goes down, the water stays there. So it's in the intertidal zone that you would construct these rock walls. So here's the rock wall, these white rocks. And when you construct this rock wall, it levels out the shoreline, this line here. Whereas if you had no rock wall, the waves would claw back the shoreline and it would become steep like we see sometimes. But when you create this rock wall, you kind of level out the playing field and you have more area that clams can thrive in, Whereas if it was just, you know, steep, they couldn't really have that nice level pool where they're going to flourish. And this is because Native people saw the conditions in which clams thrived, and they performed not just biomimicry, but ecomimicry, like ecosystem mimicry. They're mimicking ecosystems where clams thrive in a practice of habitat expansion. Habitat expansion is a really fascinating concept because you're building a home for your food instead of caging your food. There's a very big difference between a home and a cage. One is a bit more dignified. Okay. Cool thing about the clam gardens is that they are not only designed to feed human beings, they are designed also to feed animals such as raccoons, water birds, minks, otters. Everyone can come by and have a clam because you have so much abundance, imagine, that you can share with all your friends. And maybe your friends are human, maybe they're not. And the red lines here on the right side is Quadra Island. It's where we find all of these ancient, thousands of years old clam gardens. And so this is another example of indigenous food systems kind of proving that Native Americans were never hunter-gatherers. You know, hunter-gatherers are people who are just victims of circumstance, hoping to find a berry, hoping to find a deer. We were architecting, and in many places we still do, architecting our own abundance. We were creating our own ecosystems with our own agency to help our own children be fed. That's a big difference than a primitive hunter-gatherer who's just kind of roaming around hoping to get lucky, right? Like we're cultivating multi-generational systems that are thousands of years old to ensure the perpetuity of not only our human communities, but of the community of the whole ecosystem. The Ahupua'a system in Hawaii is a very beautiful agricultural system. And in this system, each watershed is divided to become its own political district. So each watershed in Hawaii is called an Ahupua'a. The Ahupua'a is a political district or a regional district, and every resident has a responsibility, a kuleana, to their respective Ahupua'a. And so imagine if we lived that way. Imagine if we all gathered together in our respective watersheds and co-created a garden together. That's what they do here. The highest level, each level has its own food production, food product. So the highest level is the realm of the gods. They don't go up there. But lower than that, they have the lo'i, or the taro fields, the taro patches. And those are a tuber that produces a lot of important calories for the islands. And just below that, you have your breadfruit trees, which are also very productive and very yummy, gigantic fruits that can help you sustain your community. And just below that, you have your fish pond. So you'd have kind of like the clam garden, except for it has holes in like little gates along the wall. And the gates have like a little grate, and little fish can get through the grate, and they go into the fish pond. It's this thing right here. And they go into the fish pond and they eat all the yummy nutrients. And they get so fat that they can't get out of the grate. So it's a very clever fish trap. And every time the tide rises, water flows into the fish pond. And every time the tide lowers, water flows out of the fish pond. So it's kind of this cool, like breathing place where nutrients flow out, attract fish, and then they all flow in. And it's very cool. I've been to one. I walked along the wall. It's very beautiful. So this system has a carrying capacity across all the Hawaiian Islands of 1.2 million people. So we believe that the Hawaiian Islands had more people in pre-colonial times than there are today, because there's not even 1.2 million people there today. So we believe, scientists believe, a community of scientists, some of them are Hawaiian, believe that there were more people in pre-colonial Hawaii in pre-colonial times than there are today, producing 100% of their food locally. Whereas today, there are less people living in Hawaii, and they import 90% of their food. So big difference. And I like this example because a lot of people think, oh, Lyla, your little Native American food systems are so cute, but they can never feed 8.5 billion people on the planet. For that, we need industrial agriculture. And to that, I say, first of all, industrial agriculture is not feeding 8.5 billion people. Half the world is hungry. And second of all, if you want to feed 8.5 billion people, these are the systems you should use, because in many cases, such as the Hawaiian case, they actually produce more food per acre than the industrial food system. And they're ecosystemic, meaning they don't destroy everything in their wake. They actually support the health of biodiversity and human communities at the same time. It's a win-win for humanity and the earth. Next is American Grasslands Pyro Management. So the Illinois Confederacy, this is Midwest area of the United States. The Illinois Confederacy shaped and altered much of this region as an anthropogenic creation. Like many other indigenous groups in North America, their most important tool was fire. Burning the prairies, they made the grasses hospitable for grazers, herbivores, and managed the prairie as a game reserve, herbivore reserve, to maximize productivity. So what this means is every time you burn, you attract herbivores. You attract game animals, so to speak. And so the reason that this happens is because you're taking all of these dead plant tissues. I'll show you my brother. My brother did an experiment. This is his field. So on the left-hand side, he did not burn. On the right-hand side, he did burn. So you can see quite a marked difference. So this is the side he did not burn. And this is the right side he did burn. And he only had burned it maybe a few weeks prior to this, maybe a month and a half max. So you can see the vast difference between this patch and this patch. And the reason why this patch is higher is very simple. There's more nutrients in the soil when you burn, because all of these plant tissues on the left side would have to compost over time. Really slow process, right? Have you ever watched a leaf compost on the forest floor? It takes like a year or more, sometimes 2 years if it's a really brittle thing. And so these had not broken down to be bioavailable nutrients for the rhizome layer. Whereas this area where he had burned everything down, and it wasn't that much stuff, it was just some stuff, from the previous crop. There's a lot more fertilizer in this side of the field. It's very simple. And so the same is true for pyric herbivory, as it were, where every time you burn, you're creating these nutrient dense grasslands, and it attracts herbivores and you can hunt them. So again, we're not hunting animals randomly hoping to find an animal. We're hunting them in places that we have created for them. So we're, again, habitat expansion. We're making a home for the herbivores to come and eat so that their families can also be fed. Yes, we might hunt a few of them in reciprocity, but we have to take care of their homelands as our covenant back to them. So the Miami Indigenous Nation is native to the Ohio River Valley, and they have a lunar calendar. So the lunar calendar is, every full moon has its own cute little name. And so the September full moon is called the grass burning moon. And the October full moon is called the big smoky moon. Now there's only 13 full moons in a year. Thus, you have to be pretty special to get your own moon. Now fire got 2 moons, each moon prescribing to the tribe or to the nation what they're meant to do, what their ecological task is for that time of year. And so the grass burning moon shows that burning was so important to our societies that it was instituted into our calendars, so that every September we be out there burning the land. This is what the Miami Nation published in 2011. They said, in Sa Shakayolia Kilswa, or the grass burning moon, we see fire as something that restores and gives new life to the prairie. Fire helps clear the land of old grass and brush and open seed pods that have fallen to the ground. Because of fire, new flowers and plants emerge in the spring. So there are some plants that have co-evolved with human fire for so many millennia that they have become pyroadapted, meaning they need fire to germinate, to bloom, to blossom. And echinacea is a longtime favorite remedy that we use when we're sick. Echinacea, for example, loves fire. You burn an area, it pops up just a few weeks later. There's echinacea everywhere. So fire burning could also stimulate the growth of medicine plants. It's quite a fascinating. It also increases the water infiltration rates because you're creating a living soil full of nutrients and calcium and phosphorus and nitrogen and all those bioavailable ash nutrients, creating a living soil, a black soil, a loamy soil, a really healthy A horizon that is every year injected with ash. And over time, it becomes a spongy, healthy living soil that soaks in the rain rather than kind of a dead clay dirt soil that repels or erodes with rain. So this is a great book about indigenous fires. It goes across the map. Here's some bison that obviously were beneficiaries of our fire, and we often imagine Native Americans chasing the buffalo around the plains, but now we're saying, okay, the buffalo were also following us around the plains. They were following our fire. Wherever we would burn, the bison could thrive. So burning was a big part of our bison pasturage management system as well. And that's how we opened up bison habitat as far east as Pennsylvania, far south as Louisiana. This is another group that uses fire in South America to make these really deep A horizons. This A horizon is probably 3,000 or 4,000 years old, and it's man-made. This would not exist without Homo sapiens. And every black dot is where we find these man-made dark earths in, quite a large area of South America. This is my region, where we plant our fields at the base of small watersheds, and we always catch the monsoon rains that come by. So when the monsoon rains come, they not only bring in water, they bring in nutrients because there's nitrogen, phosphorus, all kinds of yummy, loamy things on the upland soils. And so as the rain comes down, the rain not only brings in irrigation for the fields, but also brings in fertilizer for the fields. And so this is how you can actually have crops growing every year because it's being consistently injected with fertilizer, and you don't have to leave it fallow for very long at all. And that area is like an alluvial fan. They call it alluvial farming. So you're kind of growing in the places where the water flows during the monsoon season. And my people are from the desert. And so this is a really good way to make a desert into a garden. This is a 6,000-year-old eel farm in Australia, really debunking the myth that Aboriginal peoples were hunter-gatherers. Like, no, we were farmers. There's a slight but important difference of intentionality and agency and systematic cultivation. These oyster farms in Washington, D.C. are over 2,500 years old, quite old, a long time that they were fishing. The colonizers have now reduced the oysters in the area by 99%. So there's less than 1% of the oyster population left in the Chesapeake Bay. But these archaeological sites show us how long people were eating shells and depositing them in certain areas. These guys plant kelp forests in the ocean to attract these little silver fish called the herring. And this is the Heldsuck Nation. And they are responsible for so many more eggs being hatched in the coastal ecosystem. And so this is actually a way that people can single-handedly, with their bare hands, They can augment kelp forests in an area, which then provides more surface area for a fish to lay their eggs, which then creates more eggs to eat, but also eggs to give to the salmon, the wolves, the orcas, the eagles, the bears. Everyone feeds off of these eggs that wash onto the shore. The sea wolves, I will actually swim out and go get it. And then of course leaving enough eggs to hatch so that the herring can be born and return the next year. So this is definitely quite an incredible system of herring roe farming, herring roe cultivation. And lastly, the Norwegian example I like to give is intentional fire management in the Holocene with emphasis on hunter-gatherers in the Mesolithic in South Norway. So this lady, Lotte Selsing, she is a super nerd because she studied 63 lake beds in southern Norway. 63 ponds. Can you imagine the fortification of your character it must take to go out and take soil cores from 63 lake beds like a crazy lady and then analyze them? And what she found was that the charcoal deposits in the lake beds were showing thousands of years ago, these supposedly primitive cavemen were managing southern Norway better than we are doing today through small patchy burns. So she would see there was big charcoal deposits, and then she would see there'd be a bunch of little ones for a few thousand years, just like clockwork, just like little tiny charcoal deposits, which to her she interpreted as human set fires that were smaller and less intense. And every now and then you see no fires, and then you see a big forest fire, big charcoal deposits that indicated that there had been a big forest fire. And so this is what she said. Anthropogenic burning was different from natural fires. The fires set by people were smaller and less intense. They were predictable, almost immediately productive, meaning you'd have an influx of edible plant species in the pollen record right at the time that these little fires were happening, creating mosaics in a complex pattern of vegetation of burnt and unburnt patches. Because they reduced available fuel, they provided protection against the disruptions of natural fires. Meaning, if you burn a little bit all the time, you prevent the buildup of fuels on the forest floor, which then can create a big catastrophic fire. So I love this slide because it shows, look, this is not a Native American thing. This is a human thing. All of our ancestors were doing this thousands of years ago. They were really good land managers, and they did it on regional scales. And these supposedly stupid cavemen, which I don't like when we frame them as that, in the Mesolithic era, were managing massive swaths of land through regenerative land management techniques that also supported wildlife to the point where you could hardly call them wild anymore, because they were basically cultivated and farmed in this ecosystemic way by human beings. So this is really important to me, for us to understand that this is our common human heritage of gardening the earth, not little tiny farms, gardening the earth and having these massive positive influences on regional scales. So, what do these stories tell us? They tell us that Homo sapiens can be a gift, that the human being can be a keystone species, or a species upon which entire ecosystems depend. Time and time again, we see humans catalyzing biodiversity. We see humans being an asset to the land. We see humans contributing to the health of the ecosystems. And we see these human hands not being a bad thing, as they're so often portrayed, but as being a loving thing, a nurturing thing. And what turns a human hand from a creative force to a destructive force is simply our worldview, our value system, and our stories that we live by. So I call that the software of the human being. The software is our stories, our language, our blueprint, our value system, the principles we live by. The software, this is where capitalist ideology can live. This is where kincentric ideology can live, where we see ourselves as kin to all life, and therefore we must be responsible to them the same way we're responsible to our own grandmother, our own father, our own sister, our own brother. So the software can either be really, really good or really, really bad in terms of how it drives the hardware, the body, the human body. And it's like the human body is like the iPhone, and the ideology is the operating system that the iPhone abides by. And so unless we upgrade our software, upgrade our operating system, we're going to keep doing the same shit. We're going to keep hurting the earth, each other, everything around us, which is why gardening the mind is as important or more important as how we garden the land. We must garden our inner landscapes such that they are driven by really good value systems. So I'll give you an example of a software, an indigenous ideology, an indigenous value system. It's the Anishinaabe 7 grandfather teachings. These 7 grandfather teachings of honesty, humility, wisdom, love, respect, bravery, truth. These are the 7 virtues, the 7 grandfather teachings that every Anishinaabe person must pass on to their children. And this to me is like a disc, that you plug into a person, they're going to behave differently. And the Anishinaabe, who are indigenous to what we now call the Great Lakes region, probably understood at some point that these things were so important. Maybe their whole society collapsed. Maybe everything upended. Maybe they just learned the hard way that these are the 7 things we must pass on. And if we don't have these things, we're screwed. You can have the greatest technology in the world, the most brilliant people in the world. But if you don't have these 7 teachings, you might as well be a dead society. Because if you have the opposite of these things, the ruler software that says you're here to rule the earth, it doesn't matter how smart you are, how much money you have, you're going to mess up everything and you're going to ruin things for your children. So the Guardian software says we're the guardians of the earth. And that's my friend Colleen. She's holding a salmon in one hand, a glass of water in the other, because every morning she gets up and she fights for the salmon. That's all she ever does. Her name's Colleen Sisk. She's the chief of the Winnemem-Wintu Nation. And she has no off button. She's just constantly on this Guardian software. This Guardian operating system is moving her every day that I've ever seen her. She is fighting for her people, for her water, for her land, for her salmon relatives. Beautiful human being. I'm actually going to stop there because we are a little bit over time. And I think you get my point, though. I'm talking about indigenous food system, I'm talking about humans as a keystone species. I'm talking about our common heritage to spark, life. And we started this webinar with a harp because I was talking to the organizers about how in 1603, the year 1603, Queen Elizabeth, she ordered that every Celtic harpist be hung and that their harps be burned. And a few centuries before that, King Edward I massacred 100 Celtic harpists in one day. And so it's really important to understand that I'm talking to you about Native American culture, which has been persecuted for centuries, as you know, nearly wiped from the, it's kind of surprising I'm even here to talk to you because 98% of my people were wiped out. But that this is a mirror of how indigenous cultures around the world were persecuted. And why would they kill the harpists? Because the harpists contain the songs, and the songs contain the software. And the software is also connected to the identity, the cultural identity of the people. And it's much easier to conquer or to try to conquer a people when they don't have their identity. Because when you don't have your identity, you don't have your compass of who you are and why you're here. And when you don't have your compass, you don't have orientation. You are disoriented. And when you're disoriented, it's a little easier to knock you over. And so there's always been these attempts throughout time to denigrate and obliterate indigenous cultural softwares. And so my mission on earth is to support all of us to reclaim those cultural softwares, those ones that are founded on love for the land, love for each other, love for birds, horses, deer, wolves, mycelia, microbiome, everything, all life. If you look at the word for life in Irish, I bet it's a very interesting word. But this word life is being sacred. That's the cultural software we need. The ones that say life is sacred. And it's upon all of us to call out to our ancestors and to ask them to please guide us back home to these softwares so that we can apply them to today. It might be a different context that we are living in. We are battling different variables. We are facing an inordinate amount of challenges, but I do believe that the approach we take will be very similar to our ancestors, that our founding principles, our founding virtues, our founding values will still be the same as our ancestors were, to be founded on reciprocity, respect, reverence, responsibility, relationality, restraint, regeneration, humility, and being a good ancestor to future generations. These are the things that I think we're being called to research. And something as simple as understanding the Irish alphabet, which is all about trees. If you look at it, all the letters are referring to trees. Why is that? Why is our very language, our very way of writing is connected to the earth? So it's really important to honor these things, learn them, teach them to the children, and let that be our reclamation and our redemption of those who were hung, those who were burned, those who were tried to be erased, because we can't go out so quietly like that. Take it from my ancestors. They never gave up, and I'm here because of that. So now we're going to maybe open up a little space for conversation. The guiding question is, how would we apply these ideas to today? However, if you want to say something else, that's okay. If you have a question, I'm open to it. Any question, no bad questions here. So yeah, I'll open it up to all of you for
Thank you so much. And it was just incredible how you've gone from like so much of history, and even like questions that have come up for me is just like the scale idea of, like growing food at scale, but also in a way that can regenerate ecosystems as opposed to deplete ecosystems. And then that idea of the software of the human being, the values, the worldviews, the stories. So there's so much in what you've just spoken, and it would be lovely because we're a wee community here this evening, and I know there's people from this island and there's people from outside this island here, so it would be lovely. Now we've got about kind of 10 or 15 minutes, so it would be lovely just to open open the floor now to see what landed with people or in response to that question that Lyla has shared there. And I would just kind of just gently say, be careful around the time so that we can hear as many voices as possible. So we'll just open the floor now because it would be really great just to hear from people and then see where this conversation can go. And the question, yeah, that Lyla has shared is, how would we apply these ideas to our practice? So we've had a really broad journey there by yourself, Lyla. And I suppose we'd love to know how can this show up for us in the work that there's so many people in this call already doing incredible work. So what is it that Lyla's been speaking about that could land with us, in terms of any of those themes that she's touched on?
Um, can I say that that was amazing? That was such a fantastic talk at just the perfect time for me personally. I am doing an arts project at the minute with the Playhouse. I see Julie's on here as well. She's the other artist, doing work on climate justice in the arts with community groups in Derry. And I've kind of been hitting a wall recently of doubt because the work that we're doing is it feels great, but I'm like, is it enough though? Is it enough? Do you know, I've been reading so much about how we got here with capitalism and colonialism, and how do we change that in a few months with an arts project, and we can't, and is that all right, and is this a waste of time? And the whole thing that you said about software has just, because I know it's not a waste of time. I know it's not. That's why I'm an artist, but at the same time, couldn't articulate it for myself. Recently, I've been going, oh, been feeling so defeatist about it. So your software comments have really, oh yeah, it's just a perfect time, and thank you so much. Brilliant.
Yes, every artist is in the business of gardening the mind of the world, and that's where it all starts. So vitally important work you're doing.
Thank you.
Hi everyone. Yeah, thank you. That was amazing. I just had this isn't a fully formed thought at all, but just something kind of thinking about now. Like what you said about like sort of a half question in there about the wildlife, like we kind of managed, and then like thinking about the question of how do we bring that into our practice where we're at this place now here where our wildlife are so few and so precious. How do we ever get, back to a state like that where we could even like consider harvesting any of our, remaining wildlife? Like all we're doing now is kind of conserving and yeah, creating habitat, all right, but definitely not harvesting at all. So that's like a dream, far away dream.
Yeah, the rewilding movement, I appreciate its intention, but I've always had an issue with that word wild because, as you can see, the Norwegian ancestors, their ecosystem they created was not wild. It was actually kind of curated. Um, Not to say there's anything wrong with being wild, but it's just that America was never wild. It was a very gardened place. And there was never wilderness in the United States, although colonists like to fantasize about that. But there was never like a pristine, untouched wilderness, like almost without exception. There were a few exceptions. From coast to coast, it was extensively managed by dense populations of indigenous peoples. And so to call it wilderness, you're accidentally, inadvertently erasing a lot of human history and a lot of human heritage and a lot of our story of how we manage the land. Like those chestnut groves, right? That's not wild. But yeah, I think I see what you're saying is that you're just trying to get to the point where there's like safety for these beings, these animals and plants, and then maybe down the road you can dip your cup into it and maybe like harvest from it. And I think the two can go together.
Mm.
sometimes. Like, for example, the lo'i, the kalo fields in Hawaii, where they grow those tubers. They're like grown in a line. It's irrigated from the rain that flows down. And that's the perfect nesting grounds for the aoe bird. It's a white bird. It's endangered. So it's kind of cool. It's symbiotic. Every time they build a farm, they boost the aoe population because that's where it likes
Mm.
to do its nest. I think it co-evolves with the lo'i fields. So sometimes harvest and preservation or conservation or support of wildlife habitat, it can actually go hand in hand. Sometimes it's through ecosystemic farming that we actually create a
Mhm.
home for life, like the clam gardens, for example. Like, we're creating clam garden for us, but we're also feeding like all these things in what otherwise would have been just a blank shoreline with no life in it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else got any questions or comments? Robert?
Yeah. Um, Gurmina Malgad, Lila, thank you so much. It's a really beautiful presentation and really insightful and inspiring. And I just loved it every time you kept coming back to the research about the deposits and the crossover with the seven generations, So we're finding these deposits that our ancestors left behind, and we can learn from that. And I just see like the importance of teaching the young generations now about all this, because we might not see it now. We might not see change right now, and it's really hard to see, and sometimes really despairing to see if there is going to be change right now. But that whole concept of the seven generations gives me such peace, because I know that there's beautiful souls being birthed into this world right now that will carry this lineage when it's taught to them. They just need to hear it. So yeah, and the big one from the seven grandfathers, bravery. Like, that really stood out to me, because we need brave people to speak up for the land and for our children. And I see things are so passive right now. People are so passive. I've been passive. And so, yeah, just that stood out to me, and it's something I'll be taking forward. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very inspiring. I really appreciate your words.
Mary, were you trying to come in there?
Well, I just thought I would add how wonderful it was. And, something that was new, is new to me. What is new to me is that whole sense of farming, because I don't know much about that. And also the burning, that was new to me. It's not new to our people, like I know that, but why you would do it, and it was new to me. So that's really interesting for me. But I also the whole presentation you did just really encompassed what I truly believe, and what we're trying to do here in Ireland, and we have we have a very strong rights of nature movement here, and again that's a process of trying to work things out. So it was really curious to hear what you were saying around the wilding and the rewilding, and given a place or a mountain its own space to just be free, but then I've always wondered, how does that tie in with actually feeding people, and the importance of our language and our identity and our arts and our culture, and like embodying all of that. And I have to say something that just I loved. I'm learning to play the harp
You
badly,
have
but I'm learning to play it
You're learning to play it now?
at the moment. Yeah, yeah.
Wow. That's so cool.
And there's a big, big movement here in Ireland, because the harp is a national emblem of Ireland. There's a musical instrument, and there's a big movement in harp playing and teaching here in Ireland, and up here in Donegal. I'm part of that movement in Donegal around harp teaching. So it was beautiful. So I feel very privileged that I've listened to you tonight, and thanks, Grania, for organising. And also, it just gives me more courage to keep doing what I'm doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Shane, probably the final question, unless anybody else has something burning they want to say.
Hopefully question, but not the final word. Lyla June agus Tránna mai a Carja. Just a quick question in relation to decolonizing the language and specifically names. Maybe you can guide us here as well, because many of the people on this call are from places with many names, Western colonial names, but also decolonized names. And Turtle Island is one that's been in my vocabulary a lot more recently, referring to the land in the United States, or other people call the United States, or we hear Dora, Derry, London, Derry. There's people from that part of the world. And the list goes on, Palestine, historical Palestine. But how would you invite us to use decolonizing names to describe places like Hawaii that you mentioned, or Aotearoa, or Turtle Island?
Well, I think that the word Europe is a fascinating one. I've had debates with people of the etymology of it, but the most obvious possibility is the Greco-Roman myth of Europa, who was a mythological character who was stolen by Zeus from the shoreline. He tricked her. He turned into like a bull or something, and stole her off to an island. And I don't want to say the word on this because it's a heavy word, but he assaulted her, and she bore his children, and created these demigods. So Europa, I mean, and then other people say, no, Europe comes from a Hellenic tradition of like the wide land. And I'm like, I don't know, it just seems very coincidental that Europe sounds a lot like Europa. But anyways, it makes me sad that if that is the etymology, that we would call this land of Europe the woman who was taken and raped, like, I don't know. Don't quote me on that. Do some research, but to me, I think we should rename it if that's the etymology. And I think that the British Isles, the United Kingdom. I talked to some people in Britain recently, or rather in England, and I said, "Are y'all ever gonna pay reparations to the Scottish people?" And they started laughing, and I was like, "No, I'm serious. Like you guys had like ransacked the place, and Wales and Ireland." And they were like, "Oh, Lila's serious." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm serious." And so, like, what are the names of the old names of the places in these Brythonic languages, such as Welsh, Irish, Scottish, or Cornish? What are those names? And I think those would be the names that we use. So it's funny. It's a funny process, like Turtle Island comes from one tribe, and now all tribes use it. So there's over 800 tribes in the United States today, but we kind of all agree on the Haudenosaunee term of Turtle Island. And then Avia Yala is like sort of a more recent term for South America, created by the Kuna Nation of Panama. And so sometimes the whole of the Celtic world might clamp on to like one group's word or one group's blueprint and just kind of make it like, yeah, let's use this one. It's better than the United Kingdom, whatever. So that's an interesting question. I like that question. And I know we're over time. So unfortunately, Ollie, we won't be able to get to your question. I got to actually do a whole mess of things today. But I'm so happy to be here, and I loved your question, and I love all of your questions and comments. And I'm really appreciative to join in solidarity with the Irish nations, Irish people. And I'm Scottish personally on my dad's side, and Native American. So like I feel a lot of solidarity with fighting empire and fighting colonization with you all. and it's really quite a pleasure to be with you all today.
Great. Thank you very much, Lyla, and thanks everyone for joining us. And yeah, well, hopefully this will seep into some of the lots of conversations going on around the island and beyond with the different people that are here. And we'll share the recording with everybody. And Lyla, thank you just so much for your time and your inspiration and your breadth of knowledge. So thanks.